not start saying crazy, stupid things, not start saying defunding the police and other dumb things, because I'm worried that if we're not careful, then we're going to have even a bigger pushback by Trump, and that's going to get us into a terrible situation.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics, talking now with a dear friend, Jack Hamilton. If you read him on Real Clear Politics, it's Professor John Maxwell Hamilton to you. He's a professor at Louisiana State. You're down in Baton Rouge. I heard you had snow.
It's a freak of nature. We had a foot of snow, which never happens, and then it was 14 degrees this morning.
Wow.
Yeah. Like living in New York City, New York State.
Yeah, it's cold here too in Washington. All right, Jack, Donald Trump assumed office on Monday. I've been agitating for 4 years that Joe Biden should hold more press conferences. I'm beginning to rethink that. Donald Trump's held 2 already at the first 2 days, the first 24 hours or 30 hours. One of them was a rambling thing on Tuesday where he said that all Gavin Newsom has to do is switch a valve in Southern California of all the water it needs. And it was sort of downhill from there. But you wrote a column about the inaugural address and about you're a student of history. You write about the presidency, you write about the press. Just tell our viewers, if you're watching this on our YouTube station, if you're watching the podcast, or if you're listening on Sirius XM radio, Jack, tell our listeners about the column, and then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about it.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Carl. The speech has gotten a lot of praise. The Wall Street Journal gave it praise, which was surprising to me. Not the Wall Street Journal editorial page is conservative, but they're also quite rational and thoughtful. And I was really taken aback by how much they like Trump's speech. But the problem with the speech is when you really strip it all down, it just makes all kinds of bogus statements and vapid statements that are just meaningless. Or when it's meaningful, it's contradictory. And so the speech has a number of internal contradictions. And you have to wonder about that and what that really means for governing. Does that mean that you can't do all of these things? And if you really think you can, or you haven't thought it through that well, then what does that mean for what the next 4 years are going to be like? There are certainly things that need to be changed.
All right, but let's give 1 or 2 exampple
of what needs to be changed.
No, from the speech, of things that just were unrealistic or don't really track.
Okay, you say you want to have you want a more efficient government, but in the speech you say you're going to create a brand new department that Elon Musk is going to head. So you create a department to create more efficiency, but I mean you actually just hire more bureaucrats. You say, on the same vein, you say you want to have a bureau for external revenue, that is to collect tariffs. Well, that's just a silly gimmick. But in any event, we've been collecting tariffs for hundreds of years. I mean, we collect tariffs now. Why do we need another bureaucracy to collect tariffs? So how efficient is that? That's one example. Here's another that's worrying, really very worrying. So we say he wants to be known as the peace president, but he's angering our allies, which you don't usually just go attack allies. You find a way, you have disagreements with them. But then you say to the Panamanians, we want to take back the Panama Canal, and they don't want to give it back. So what does take back mean? Does that mean we send in the troops? I mean, what does that mean?
Well, Jack, that's one I've been wondering about. This was I wasn't in journalism yet, but Jimmy Carter did this. This was a treaty. This wasn't something that just happened. So is he going to abrogate the treaty? He's making some claims. He says that the Panamanians are charging us too much. He said that they let the canal run into disrepair. They aren't taking care of it. He says that the Chinese are really running the ports there. So he's made these assertions. I don't actually know independently if they're true. The stuff that he talks about that I know about, like that you can just turn a faucet in California and a valve in Southern California have as much water as he wants. I know these aren't true, but sometimes he, to me, acts less like a president, more like a real estate negotiator. He's trying to open a discussion with the Panamanians. Maybe he doesn't really want the United States flag to fly over it again. Maybe he wants something else. And he sort of jumpstarts these conversations. And I'm part of me as the journalist, I want the stuff to be factual. The other part of me thinks, okay, I have to maybe take a step back and see what he's really doing here.
Yeah, what so happens curiously, I know quite a lot about the Panama Canal.
All right.
Some years ago, I did a story where I tried to swim the Panama Canal, the whole canal from deep water to deep water. Only one person's ever done it, and that's Richard Halliburton. He did it in the 1920s. Went from the Gulf of America, as Trump would like us to call it, to the Pacific. And so and they wouldn't let me do it because now, of course, everything in the canal is regulated, and all they want is to have films of Love Boat going through. When I told them I wanted to swim it, they actually took me down and showed me a film of Richard Halliburton doing it. But I got in the water, by the way. I swam part of it. But anyway, I learned a lot about the canal. It's actually run pretty well. It's run well. It's an important business for the Panamanians. And other claims that Trump is making about the canal are just not true. What is true is that Chinese have put up port facilities at both ends. I guess that's something, but we could put up our own port facilities, but they're not overcharging us. Or charging us more than anybody else. So maybe that is a negotiating tactic, but it's not a good negotiating tactic. And you can't say you're a peace president and then making these truculent comments about takeover. And I think I see something bigger here, Carl. And I'm not one, as you know, I try to be pretty much down the middle of the road when I write, even if I'm writing an opinion column. But I see something happening here that is worrying, and that is, on the one hand, a lot of bluster, a lot of measures being taken very quickly, getting rid of all DEI workers. That's something that was announced this morning. Maybe some people think that's a good idea. I'm not arguing one way or the other, but there's this whole long list of things that are happening very quickly, some of which are unconstitutional, like telling people who are born in the United States they can't be American citizens if their parents can't.
I'd like to revisit that. We'll come back to that in a minute. Yeah, keep making your point.
But anyway, but the problem here is that he's going to be having fights on all fronts. And that's not a good idea. In fact, it's very hard to get things done when you're fighting everybody all the time. It's not very strategic. And furthermore, and this is a major point I tried to make in the article, there's a fundamental flaw in his thinking and in the thinking of Republicans who are going along with all of this, and that is that he has a mandate. He actually doesn't have a great mandate. He has a very small mandate. And he didn't even win the popular vote by a majority. He won a plurality. And Biden's failure as president was in part tied to the fact that he acted as if he had a big mandate, and he didn't. And so he overreached. And Trump
as you point out in your column, Jack, he had a bigger mandate than Trump. If you're just going to go by the vote totals.
Yeah.
Look, I agree with this. Let me do a quick ID break here. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics. You're listening to RCP on Sirius XM Radio, POTUS channel 124, or maybe watching it on our podcast. I'm talking with John Maxwell Hamilton, professor of journalism at Louisiana State University and a columnist for Real Clear Politics. Jack, I wanted to ask you about something though. This birthright citizenship thing. Again, he signs an order or whatever, executive order. Well, it's not something that can be done with executive order. It may not be done except with a constitutional amendment. For nearly 100 years, there's language in the 14th Amendment that suggests that pretty strongly that people born here are American citizens, and never seriously been challenged. There was a Supreme Court case. The Supreme Court affirmed that. That's been basically the policy for 200 years. There have been people who've raised questions about slight ambiguous nature of the language. They've never gotten anywhere. So obviously this can't be done with a presidential pen. But it seems to me that what Trump do, and again, I don't mean to be giving him too much credit, but I also don't want to give him too little credit. He seems to be everything's on the table. What we need, it seems to me, and Trump is not this articulate, but a national conversation about immigration. What should be our refugee status? This refugee law was basically misused during the Biden administration. That's what he wants to say. I think most people agree with that. We take between 1 million and 1.5 million legal immigrants every year. What should be their criterion? Is that the right number? Should it be less? Should it be more? These are we don't really have a conversation. The two parties just call each other's names. And it seems to me when Trump makes these grandiose gestures or statements, what he's doing is setting up the environment where we can have a national conversation about immigration and see where we want to be as a country. Am I being too charitable?
Well, because I don't I don't think in the bombastic way Trump does. I have trouble maybe putting myself in his place, and maybe he has a brilliant strategy. I appreciate what you're saying, but I guess I just don't agree. I don't think it's good to lay out markers that only divide people.
Mm.
And I think that's what this does. In fact, in the area of immigration, I would say there is a mandate, a huge national mandate to fix immigration. The Republicans and Democrats want to do it, and the public wants it done. And they're right. And so I think there's a case where Trump could actually, in another way, really go down the road of getting this done, and done fairly quickly, probably. I mean, no legislation happens overnight, but it could be done. And that's something that he could really hang his hat on. And I might say, if Biden had done a better job, even though the Republicans, didn't want to give him a win, if Biden had done a better job on the border, we would have a Democrat in the White House today.
I think I happen to agree with that. Yeah. All right. Here's the other thing I want to ask you about the rhetoric of Donald Trump, President Trump's inaugural address, and he gave 2 other speeches that day. Now he's done 2 press conferences. He's been speaking. If you add it all together, like 4 or 5 hours in the first 48 hours he was president. I thought initially, and I said this on this show, that the inaugural address disappointed me by how combative it was. It was in many ways a combination of a campaign speech and a State of the Union speech. It wasn't a traditional inaugural address, and he didn't give one the first time. There was no real. He said, "I want to be a unifier," but he didn't really. Okay, one line in the speech of a lot of non-unifying other sentences. But when I see this blizzard of executive orders, I'm thinking, well, maybe it would have been hypocritical for him to, be, holding hands and singing Kumbaya. that this is a president who sees himself as a disruptive person, a change agent. He thinks he has a mandate, and a lot of, when he says on inauguration day, to a crowd, Joe Biden was the worst president we ever had. It's not how presidents talk in the past, but it's how Trump's governing. So maybe it's a unifying. It's at least unifying in terms of, the message goes with the rhetoric, the policy goes with the rhetoric. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's consistent with itself.
Yeah,
sure. I mean, but that doesn't change the fact. I guess you could give him credit for doing what he said he would do. But although I still maintain that what he said he would do has contradictions, vagueness, and just platitudinous nonsense. But I would argue that, yes, it is important to make bold statements and to do things boldly. But if you do it the way he's doing it, he's going to accomplish a lot less than he would otherwise. And he's going to put the country through a lot. He's going to get people upset over things they shouldn't be upset about. Why worry about whether you're born in the United States, you're a citizen or not? Why not deal with the real clear border issues? Don't pick every fight. Pick a few and win. And I thought about this today as I was looking at what happened yesterday after I wrote the column. I'm developing the 3 tsunami thesis. Trump creates a tsunami. Then there's a tsunami against him that's going to include some of his former supporters. And then we're going to see what the third one is. And I'm worried about that. I think it's very important for people who object to some of the things Trump wants to do, that they remain calm. They use the institutions we've got to push back in a reasonable way and not start saying crazy, stupid things, not start saying defunding the police and other dumb things, and just be calm and carry on, as the British like to say. Because I'm worried that if we're not careful, then we're going to have even a bigger pushback by Trump, and that's going to get us into a terrible situation. And I'm worried about that because I think Trump doesn't respect institutions, and I think he fancies that he has this big mandate, and who knows what kind of ideas he would come up with. I mean, I'm not predicting exactly what would happen, but I'm worried. I'm frightened. Yeah.
Well, we'll be watching. That's going to do it for us today. You've been listening to John Maxwell Hamilton, professor at LSU. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington bureau chief. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM Radio. Join us again tomorrow, same time, 3 p.m. in the West, 6 p.m. here in the East. Have a good evening.